Good morning, everyone. My name is Fadzaima Shiri, and I'll be moderating today. It's 10 o'clock. I guess we have to get started. I just want to thank you all for joining us for our fifth and final session of this webinar series on prescribed fire. And today's webinar focuses on cultural burning. And as usual, we have two great speakers that are going to share their knowledge with us. I just want to let you know that we made a slight change in our program. Instead of the roundtable discussion that we advertised with the many people that we are expecting on these webinars, we decided to change Jared's presentation to be a presentation instead of a discussion with everyone. As usual, please enter your issues, technical issues, and general comments in the chat box. And for questions for our presenters, enter those in the Q&A box at the bottom of the Zoom page. And all the questions that you'll be asking for both the first and the second presenter will be answered at the end of the session. So, Max, do you want to put up the poll, the entry poll? If you can please just go ahead and fill in that poll for us, we'll greatly appreciate that. And remember to click submit when you're done. And while you're doing that, I just want to remind you, if you are Society of Rangeland Management, CPRM, you can apply for CEUs for this webinar series. So send me an email. We included that information in the emails that we're sending out to you. And also, if you need any sort of proof of attendance, we can also provide those for you as well. And we're going to try and remind and share that information of who to contact in the emails that we're sending out after the end of this series. For the sake of time, I think while you are finishing up entering some of your responses, let me introduce our first speaker. Our first speaker today is Dr. Jared Aldern. He's going to talk to us about the social history of fire, learning and burning together in the Southern Sierra. I guess, Max, you can end the poll, and Jared, please go ahead and share your presentation.
Okay. How's that? Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. Okay, yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jared Dahl Aldern, and I'm going to, I have the honor and privilege of preceding Ron Goode's presentation on cultural burning with a little bit of historical context. So I'm calling this little presentation a social history of fire, learning and burning in the Southern Sierra region. First, a little more introduction of myself. I'm an environmental historian and a fire practitioner. And I wanted to tell you a little bit, not only about my academic background, but my experience with fire. And I guess I'll start with when I was a private landowner a few years ago, or quite a few years ago now. In 2002, I was living in Ranchita, California, down in San Diego County, which is really at the intersection of the traditional homelands of Cahuilla and Cupeño, Ipe, and Luiseño people. And I was living on 30 acres there, and had an experience with what at the time was, a pretty major, large-sized fire that hadn't been experienced for a while in that area, a 60,000 acre fire in 2002 called the Pines Fire. And it burned through my 30 acres of oak savanna and chaparral, about 90% of the property. My house itself was saved by an airplane drop of fire retardant, and then an engine crew from Arizona came in and hand cut a line that formed a really nice V and split the fire around the house. So the house was saved, but I lost a big old, about an 80-year-old barn, and some other outbuildings. And that really, I had already been interested in fire history, but I guess let's just say that direct experience with fire got me more interested in, a more frequent relationship and use of burning and fire. So I moved to the Fresno area in 2006. And since then, I have participated in cultural burns with Ron Goode and the North Fork Mono tribe, and he'll tell you in a bit a lot more about those burns. And I was employed. I'm retired now from my careers in education and tribal government, but I was employed for a while by the Cold Springs Rancheria of Mono Indians here in Fresno County. And I participated in some pile burning and some cultural burns with Cold Springs Rancheria. And I've also had the opportunity a couple of times to take part in prescribed burns with Southern California Edison and their forestry department near Shaver Lake. And I've had the opportunity to observe prescribed burns, not take part in them, but get an idea of how CAL FIRE and the Sierra National Forest also go about their prescribed burns and pile burns. And I'll tell you a little bit more in a while, but there's a brand new cooperative that I'm a part of, which is the Sierra Sequoia Burn Cooperative. It's private landowners and tribes taking part, and we've had our first work day, which included some burning, some pile burns last month in May. So in terms of my academic background or my interest in fire history, my master's thesis was on the historical ecology of San Felipe Valley, which is down there near Ranchita, where I lived at the time. So environmental history or historical ecology is the study of changes in plants and animals and surface water and people's interactions with the environment. So I focused, and fire history was a big part of that place in San Felipe Valley in San Diego County. And then once I was up here in Fresno County, I did a doctoral dissertation, again focused on environmental history, but really learning about history through the stories of the North Fork Mono tribe. So I collaborated pretty closely during my dissertation work with Ron Goode, and started to learn a lot from the traditional stories of the North Fork Mono tribe, and looking at them as historical documents and as educational lessons, not only for North Fork Mono people, but for others. So there's my introduction, and I want to back up a little bit now and do a land acknowledgement, which is, I guess, it's not only the right thing to do during a talk like this, but I want to, by acknowledging the the people whose homeland we're on and that we'll be talking about, it's it gives you an idea, I think, of the complexity of the human history of this place. So I think I have my cursor here. I don't know how well you can see it, but I'm in Clovis, California, talking to you from Clovis, California, which is along here, sort of at the end of Dry Creek. And then I'm pointing in the middle of the screen at the word Gashawoo. So I'm speaking to you from the homelands of the Gashawoo and kind of an overlap with Pitkachi people, Valley Yokuch, and Foothills Yokuch peoples. And their descendants, probably are people who live at Table Mountain Rancheria and maybe Cold Springs and other rancherias today. Once white settlers forced them off these lands. And we'll be talking about the homelands of Holcomb people. So I'm circling that with my cursor right now. So many Holcomb Mono people live at Cold Springs Rancheria today. And also be talking about North Fork Mono lands and Wobunich and Entebich lands, which are associated with the Dunlap Band of Mono today. Pogeisha lands near what today is Auberry. You can see the San Joaquin River running here. Whoops. And Shaver Lake. So Pogeisha, the descendants of Pogeisha people are Big Sandy Rancheria residents now. So this map is a map, by the way, that Ron Goode had a lot to do with. He worked on it in collaboration with the California Department of Water Resources. And just for reference, he and I made it a part of an educational curriculum we wrote. And if you want to find it, you can find it on lessonsofourland.org. So this is a land of traditional land, a map of traditional lands in Central California. So how did all these diverse, not only the people I just mentioned or acknowledged, but all those diverse groups of people in the Central California region and beyond, how did they interact? Well, there was this incredibly complex and well-developed network of trails so that people could visit one another, trade material goods, and trade ideas, have intellectual exchanges. So there was frequent travel on this network of trails. This is just a snapshot of a map that I took in Sierra National Forest office. It's a Sierra Forest map with superimposed on it by a historian named Jim Snyder from Yosemite. The principal sort of main trails that he was able to discern through years of research in the Sierra National Forest area. So you'll notice Yosemite, the brown area up here towards the top of the map, doesn't have a whole lot of trails documented. Not that there weren't trails there, but the historical documentation of the trails in the Sierra National Forest is greater because the National Forest was not closed off to ranching and travel in the way that Yosemite was earlier on. So just for reference, here's Shaver Lake again, and this line below Shaver Lake would be basically in the area of Shavy Dinky Road out to the Dinky Creek area. And beyond that, you have Courtright and Washawn reservoirs, Huntington Lake up here, and Edison and Florence in other areas. So there was this complex network of trails, and understand also that these are the principal trails. So you had all kinds of travel in between these areas, and people interacting across the landscape and with Paiute peoples across the crest of the Sierra. So they really, like this area here where it looks like there was a lot of interaction is beyond Kaiser Ridge. You know, you're getting into some reasonably high elevations where people were traveling and spending a lot of time. And I should say that, you know, these trails are not only connections between places where people were, you know, destinations where people were traveling to, but I look at them as long, winding places in themselves. And all along these trails, people were lighting fires on a regular basis to keep the trails open, but also to foster certain kinds of plants or to maintain animal habitat that they were interested in maintaining, like good habitat for deer, for instance. These, and you can kind of start to look at some of these compartmentalized areas and think about how some of these areas, if they were to be restored with fire ignitions along those trails to open them up and benefit those cultural resources along them, how they might also double as you know, safety areas for firefighters and areas that can compartmentalize a wildfire that might start with a lightning strike. So that's Jim Snyder's work. And this is a map from an earlier ethnographic survey by Dorothea Theodoradis's company. And it's a little harder to see. I'll show you another version of part of this map in a moment. But these are principal Holcomb trails. So not only you know, the larger trails with lots of tribes traveling them, but these are mostly Holcomb people who today again live in Cold Springs Rancheria right here. And here you might be able to barely see Shaver Lake, just for reference. And here's Dinky Shaver Road with a trail indicated, a historical trail. In this area, Grand Bluff. And going up the drainages, again, starting to sort of indicate compartmentalized areas, are trails that were maintained by fire by Holcomb people coming up from the Brett's Mill area and up through the Grand Bluff area. I just want to show you another version of this, that forked area with Brett's Mill. What this is, Ernest Marquez of the tribe of Cold Springs Rancheria took Theodoradis's information and superimposed it on a satellite image. So it gives you an idea of kind of the Holcomb area and how it overlapped with other people's areas. And some of the routes of travel, again, coming up here, this would be generally the Brett's Mill area, sorry. And going up the drainages like Providence Creek. These blue dots, by the way, were located by Sierra National Forest staff, and they are potential areas for cultural burns under oaks. So to benefit the oaks and to clear those areas out and reduce competition and increase acorn crops. And there's been an attempt or two at some cultural burns, but in those areas, but that's a collaboration that could use some strengthening between the forest and the tribes to do more work in those areas. So these trails, again, were you know, not only routes of trade and ways for families to get to other family members and visit them, but they were routes of intellectual exchange and teaching each other about fire and where to light fires. And a lot of that information is contained in the stories. that I mentioned earlier that my dissertation focused on. So when they're talking about a water source along the trail, for instance, you can bet that that water source was maintained with fire, because you know, what you want to have is a nice clear area around the spring with maybe one shade tree so that you have a water source the next time you go traveling through. But in addition to exchanging ideas with other native peoples, you know, the Holkama and other native peoples would have started to exchange information about how to light these fires and where these trails went and keep them open with European and Euro-American ranchers when they came into the area. And in fact, ranchers and shepherds, sheep herders, really actually increased the frequency of fire at first when they came on the scene. So there's this quotation from Julia Tyler Shin, who said she was the wife of the first Sierra National Forest supervisor in the early 20th century, Charles Shin, and she was an administrator with the forest. And in her letter, she mentions this as a you know, common saying of the day: fire follows sheep like night the day. And it is true that sheep herders and ranchers in general would have most likely wanted to increase the fire frequency in this area. We have an indication of this. So, you know, Native American people were likely the guides taking the Spanish and Mexican and ranchers of other ethnicities up into the higher Sierra to show them where the good meadows and the good forage would be for their livestock. And the stock herders increased the fire regime. The fire frequency. So they changed the fire regime because they were mostly interested in grass. So there's some cultural resources that don't require or actually would, you know, would be harmed by frequent fire. But grasses, you pretty much, if you're interested in increasing grass, you would pretty much want to burn it every year. So you take your sheep up to graze, and then as you're coming back down the mountain, you light the meadows and light the grassy areas so that you get a good grass crop the next year. So this is an indication, a scientific study from Alan Taylor of, I believe he's at Penn State, and Carl Skinner from the Forest Service, and Scott Stevens, I believe, was on this paper, a couple other people, showing fire frequencies, fire activity index. And you'll notice that in the pre-European area, the Native American era, there was a certain frequency that was actually increased in what they're calling the Hispanic, you know, when the stock herding area started in the Sierra Nevada. I want to thank Will Harling, by the way, from the Mid-Klamath Watershed Council for letting me use this slide of his, but it's from this paper down here if you want to look it up: Sociological Transitions Trigger Fire Regime Shifts. So there was an increase during the Hispanic period. In the gold rush, there was not quite so much emphasis anymore on, you know, after the gold rush, the late 19th century, there was not quite so much emphasis on frequent fire, so it fell. And then when the Forest Service took over a lot of the land in the Sierra Nevada, we had fire suppression and what they called scientific forestry. And the idea behind scientific forestry was to suppress all fire. So it's a really interesting look here at fire frequency across time. So I mentioned, you know, ranchers learning in the early years from Native American people, and then, you know, we have ranchers who got together and had cooperative events and taught each other. This is a shot from Harold Biswell's book, Prescribed Burning in California Wildlands. And this is a shot from, I believe it's the 1950s, from Madera County, of ranchers, as he says here in the caption, as Biswell says, assembled in the early morning for a controlled burn to be started in about another hour or so. So they had about 115 people involved here, and using their own, private individuals cooperating with one another, using their own equipment, 9 water sprayers and 2 Jeeps. And here's a shot of the results of one of those fires, again from Biswell's book. If you look up here at the top shot, this is Feingold Creek in Madera County. I believe this is close to the O'Neill's area. And this is in the middle of summer. So first shot, I believe, is July 1961. I might be wrong about the year. And then the second shot is from a month later in August. And this is top shot is prior to the burn, and the bottom shot is after the burn, and instantly in the middle of the summer, even with no rain, and you can see a lot of the riparian vegetation is still intact here, but they're burning the slopes and they're getting a lot more water into the stream in the middle of the summer. Just a closer look here. This is that top shot, and you can see that Biswell put a dot here and a triangle on this upper rock just to give you some reference. Got the dry creek, and then the second shot with those 2 symbols for your reference, the triangle and the circle, and you've got enough water in the creek for a couple of guys to go for a swim and pose for the photo. Another quick photo from Biswell. So he's, native folks taught ranchers back in the day who carried that generational knowledge forward. And then Biswell learned from ranchers, and as a cooperative extension educator, he took his knowledge and did a lot of public workshops. So this is a shot of a workshop in in the Ponderosa Pine Zone that he did. And as he says here, no one seems concerned. I also don't see a lot of PPE, protective equipment on the part of the participants, but they don't seem concerned, too concerned about the fire getting at them or the smoke, because they could move around the fire. It's well controlled. So here's a photo courtesy of my friend Ben Kimbler, and this is a big fire in Toll House on August 3rd, 1931, a wildfire that did a lot of damage. And Ben mentioned that after that in the 30s, the 40s and 50s saw a lot of increase in controlled burn on the part of ranchers and other private landowners in the area. So here they are conducting a burn. You can see the fellow in the mid background there with a drip torch. And they let it rip in certain areas. It was under control. Here they are patrolling with a water sprayer in the back of a Jeep pickup. But there were some good burns that these folks started to do in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and even up into the 80s. I believe this gentleman's name is Woody Van Vliet. Again, this is one of Ben Kimbler's. It's from his collection of historical photos. And they were very clear about their objectives, which was to increase grass again. And also in this upper left photo here, you see Woody Van Vliet again doing some water measurements with a farm advisor by the name of Richard Jones. So they were interested in increasing that water and increasing the forage. So here he is looking at the forage that comes back after a prescribed burn. So up to the present day and last month, we have recently formed a new cooperative, burn cooperative. The ranchers from the 50s and 60s and 70s who were doing those burns kind of fell out of the habit, especially when CAL FIRE made it clear how liable they would be for, the ranchers would be for escape burns. So it's a practice that's fallen by the wayside, but this is a shot from the work day that I mentioned with the brand new Sierra Sequoia Burn Cooperative, where we got together people from a couple of tribes, and I and Ben worked on his land. One day, here's a preparation of a pile by a member of the Cold Springs tribe and a member of the Dunlap tribe. And we got the piles burning, cleared. The purpose was to clear an area, create a buffer zone, so that in a year or so, we can go back and help Ben with a broadcast burn. But this was our initial work day, a couple of members of the Cold Springs tribe here, getting some burning going and trying to get that exchange of information and mutual learning going again. Just a shot of, that's Ben in the white hat gesturing with Cold Springs members to the side, learning how to drive his skid steer to help with making some of the piles. So there's interaction, there's learning going back and forth with this new group of ours, and some reciprocal exchanges. So my last slide with an image is a map again, just to give you another overview. This is a map that Ron Goode and I put together for the Department of Water Resources again. And this is an overview of the area I've been talking about, kind of a different overview with, you see some of the tribes, North Fork Rancheria, Big Sandy Rancheria, Cold Springs Rancheria, and the unacknowledged tribes, like the North Fork Mono tribe, which is distinct from the Rancheria, and the Dunlap Mono tribe aren't labeled on the map, but they are in this Mono area, and the Yokuch areas are here. And I just want to point out that, you know, again, if you travel up this crest of the Sierra and go over it, as people did for thousands and thousands of years, traveling back and forth, there's a lot of interaction between the people on the western slope and the Paiute tribes from the Owens Valley and further south, and Tubatalabal and Kauai Sioux people also. So that's all I have. Here's my name again, Jared Dahl Aldern. I do like to use my middle name to avoid confusion with a young second cousin of mine who's a scholar in a different academic field in Colorado. And you know, if you want to find out more about the Sierra Sequoia Burn Cooperative that's just getting off the ground, we're planning a couple more burns with other landowners, with Ben and another couple of landowners. Or if you want to find out more about fire history, this last item on my list is a brand new fire history project that I'm involved with the Huntington USC Institute on California in the West, down in Los Angeles, and it's called the West on Fire, and it has the pretty ambitious goal of illuminating the last 10,000 years of fire history in the Western United States. So if you're interested in finding out more, or you know, we're interested in doing oral histories and learning as much as we can, you know, and finding photos and doing map research, all sorts of things. My website is there, jareddahlaldern.net, and my email address is jared@jareddahlaldern.net. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Jared, for that historical perspective. Definitely important to kind of inform us as we try to bring fire back onto our landscapes, and also highlighting the importance of people coming together to at least make this happen. I just want to also let you know that you can continue to add questions for Jared in the Q&A box. Next is our second presentation given by Honorable Ron Goode of the North Fork Mono Tribe. He's going to give his presentation on the benefits of cultural burning. Max, do you want to share his presentation for us so we can?
Good morning.
Good morning.
Is that full screen? On the slideshow?
Max, do you want to put it in full screen mode?
Sure.
Oh, it's supposed to be.
So sorry to everybody that's online here. I could not get on to Zoom. I don't have any idea what the problem is. I even went out and ordered more megabytes. That didn't work either. So I'm borrowing my daughter's computer, and I have no idea how to work it. So the good folks there at Mariposa are running the program for me. So we've been, as a tribe, we've been doing restoration work actually since 1991. We started meadow restoration in 2003, and then we started we actually started burning in the meadows in around 2005, and then we started doing meadow restoration in around 2014, and then from about 2005 again, we've been doing a number of cultural burnings in about 4 different counties. So past few years, since about 2015 or so, we've been doing some large cultural burning in Mariposa on a 400-acre property, and currently we're burning in a 50-acre village site. And so this is, of course, prime ground for our cultural resources, such as three-leaf sumac, which is the sourberry, elderberries, coffee berries, and redbuds, and so a number of different plants that our people gather. The interesting thing that when I met the gentleman back in 1978 or so, he had owned the land. His name was Jack Kirk, and he owned the property since the late 30s. And when he got it, there were a lot of Indian people came to harvest there, and he continued to allow them to come, and most of them already had designated sites on the property, and he continued to honor that, what family gathered where and when. So when I arrived on the scene, I saw all this beautiful sourberries and all these other resources, and it was like, oh my gosh. And he goes, no, that you don't get to have that, you know. So okay, that's the wrong slide. I'm not sure what that is. I think we even got the wrong I think we got the wrong slide altogether, to tell you the truth. My goodness, too bad. And I thought I checked that over. No. Okay, we're gonna have trouble here. Anyway, I'll kind of stick to the program here. It's a completely different program, so let me reverse my thinking and my talking. So back to what we've been doing with restoring the land, let's put it this way. We've been working on meadows, and so this particular tree is in what we call Crane Valley. It's about 3,400 foot elevation. And when we started restoring Crane Valley Meadow in 2003, basically this tree was almost dead and it was on its way out. So little by little, we began to revitalize it and clear the land. And so when you look underneath you, underneath the oak, you could not see underneath it. You could not see the ridge in the background there underneath the tree. You could not see through the trees. It was totally inundated with young growth. The tribe had been kicked off of this particular meadow in 1980, and it is the #1 deer grass site on the Sierra National Forest. So for over 20 years, we were removed from this meadow and could not harvest the deer grass, nor could we harvest any of the acorn. And the forest used it to grow a plantation because it had a year-round spring. And then what had happened was that they had hundreds of little saplings growing, pine, and of course it sucked all the water up. So in 2003, we started out by removing everything that didn't belong there, including all the trash and the garbage. And then later on, after 2010, we had restored the meadow to where the spring was running year round, and we continued to clean the meadow off. And then we started monitoring the oaks, and we had 62 black oaks and 49 golden oaks. So at that point in time, none of the golden oaks were really producing acorn, maybe just a few, and we only had 4 black oaks out of those 62 that were producing acorn. We took that to 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, this is 2020. So after the 2017 water year, and we had 5 burns on this piece of meadow, then we ended up with somewhere between 12 to 15 oaks that were producing acorn, and a lot of it. In other words, each tree was producing about 25 to 50 pounds of acorn per gathering, and we were now getting 2 to 3 gatherings, which means that from September to December, acorn will have about 3 different droppings. And so we were able to come back and revisit this tree in particular at least 3 times. And so we had a really nice harvest in the last 2 or 3 years. Next slide. Is there another slide? So one of the important things for any restoration work is to have the young sprouts coming out. And this is a young black oak, and you can see the size of the leaf when it's got the proper water and sunlight and proper restoration. Next slide. So one of the key things here is on any of our restorations is working with the habitat, working with the wildlife. And you'll have to look closely here. And I don't have any control over the mouse here, but there are bits and pieces of leaf that has been eaten on by the animals. And this is about a 3-year-old sprout. So what happens with on a meadow like this, and you got to, and let's get a little continuity to this, is that when the Indian was living on the land, we have thousands of meadows, and just about every meadow has an archaeological site tied to it in very close proximity, because that's where the water is. But it's also where the animals are. And we've restored 6 meadows on the Sierra National Forest. And that means that we've brought back the water. We've eliminated what doesn't belong there. And we've increased the species on that meadow that belongs on that meadow from 15 to 20 to as high as 160 different types of species, from the insects to reptiles to animals to birds. And so when we look at the life and of a meadow, and the process of this life, that a deer takes between about 2.5 years for a deer to be impregnated, and 8 months gestation. So you're talking about more than 3 years before a little fawn will come along. So these little fawns, once they come along, then they're eating these young shoots on your meadow up to about 3 years before they go out and have little fawns. And you can see some of the stems there if you're able to. Whoever's handling this slide, if you move your arrow a little bit, yeah, right in there, and in a number of places. I have a number of photos that's not on here, but where you can actually see 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, last month, last weekend. You can really see what was been chewed on and how long ago. And so the idea being that the mother having the young fawn, and the fawn grows up to have her fawns, they keep bringing it back to the meadow. And it may not always be this bush. You'll have a number of different bushes, because after 5 years, for some reason, which I don't know yet, other than probably taste, but after 5 years, they quit chewing on the young shoots, and they won't start chewing on the saplings until they're 10 years. So for about 5 years, it's left alone and allowed to grow. Now, in other cases, then when the Native American was living out there on the land, as we are now working these meadows again, then we come in and we either masticate it, cut it down, prune it, or burn it, and so that it has a new start. And then we leave some that are up in different spots, and keep working the system. Now, not only are the deer back, and you'll go out to this meadow and constantly find half a dozen deer laying around out there, or eating out there, or a bear rolling around out there, you'll also find a deer that's been killed out there. And that is from the lion. The lion will bring in the deer, and he'll rip off a head, or he'll rip off a hindquarters, and leave the rest for everybody else that needs to feed on the meadow. Now, he could have kept it out, or she could have kept her kill out there someplace in the brush, but no, they bring them over here to the meadow. And as that kill deteriorates, you can look at the bones and see different teeth marks on those bones, that from moles to gophers to squirrels to uh, porcupines, raccoons. Everybody needs that calcium. Everybody needs to come, or they come over and chew on those bones. And so eventually it all gets used up, and then one day it's all gone. So this is the process of restoring a meadow, and what we're doing out there as well. Next. So when we're looking at golden oaks, and you're looking at the cap here, and that looks like a sombrero on it. And so these are nice, healthy golden oaks. And actually, I borrowed this one from my good friend Jonathan Long up north. And so, I'm cheating a little bit, but our golden oaks look pretty darn good too. We got some really nice big fat acorns, and most of our golden oaks are now producing acorns. For you scientists running around out there, we've had this great conversation that many times folks are calling these canyon oaks, and these are not canyon oaks, these are golden oaks. They are related, and the actual canyon oak doesn't have this kind of a cap. It has a cap very similar to the black oak, only these are the leaves and this is the acorn. All right, next. So this is what a harvest should look like, and this is a young Margaret Beatty, Tipiuni, and back when she was, I forget how old she was, I think 15 at the time. And this is sitting in the middle of their harvest. And so my mother was an acorn gatherer, and, not so good year was at least 10 100-pound sacks of acorn, and a good year was 20. Go. Next. This is, of course, the chinkapin, which is up at a little higher elevation. There are many different kinds of acorn available. Next. One of the things with the meadow, when you've restored the meadow, this is in the meadow watershed, probably pretty close to 100 yards away from the meadow. And these are young trees that are coming out, and you can see the green new leaf growing on it. And that is based on the dew from the early morning meadow. And not only is that on these leaves, I've found it on numerous leaves and trees all around the meadow. Next. And of course, one of our prime aspects of the meadow is our medicines and the different products that will come out. And this is our California mint. Next. And of course, wormwood, and many different uses for these medicinal products. Next. We have yarrow. Yarrow, when used properly, will stop bleeding and cut, and scratch, or scrape. Next. And of course, we have clover growing in the meadow. Next. Running out of time, so we're going to move faster, a little faster. This is the sunflower tarweed. It is, I have fight with my botanist down here because, she loves this tarweed. The only problem is this tarweed will take over my meadow, and so, but it has a nice flower to it, and that flower will bring in the little birds, like the hummingbirds, the little golden sparrows, I think it is, different ones that come in that really like it. And so, I always let her have a patch or two and say, okay. And then when she's not looking, I go back out and cut them all down. Okay, next. And of course, we do have our native tobacco that's out there as well. Of course, in this case, we're looking at some nice ones that grow in the local nursery. Next. Next. There we go. And if you're looking at good growth, that last one was about 6 foot high tobacco. That's the way it's supposed to be grown. Next. This is tree tobacco. And tree tobacco has been around a long time. They tell me it's an invasive, but our people were using it to heal the Spaniards after we shot them with arrows. And that was clear back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And the tree tobacco was here at that point in time. So maybe Bigfoot brought it in. Who knows? Next. So back out on some of our burns, including Mariposa, we're looking at the Sourberry, the 3-leaf sumac, and every time that you burn, other plants come up, including tobacco. Next. And of course, you can see here within the Sourberries, the tobacco really loved it. Been sitting there, had not been on the Mariposa property, but all around it, a quarter mile away, half mile away. But the seed's been there, waiting for fire. Next. And of course, this is what your mouth should be watering about right now if you've had Sourberries and you know how good they are and how they taste, and you're probably saliving a little bit because these are nice big bunches and they'll even get bigger and better. This is from our burn about 5 or 6 years ago. Next. Now this is the Redbud, nice and beautiful. Unfortunately, it's basically kind of in its last stages. It is not very useful other than it looks pretty. Next. So we have to burn it and restart. And of course, I use a lot of the colleges. University of Davis comes in every year. University of Middlebury Institute out of Monterey, Kenyatta College, Berkeley, Fresno State, Chico. Sure, I'm missing a few. But Fresno City, I like to use, get the kids out here, get some of their professors out here, and get them to have hands-on and actually see what's going on and how to do this. Next. And of course, I have my own tribal team and trained, and this is my nephew who's been burning with me for about 10 years. I can actually turn the program completely over to him and he'd take care of it. Not a problem. Next. Again, as soon as the Redbud was burned, and then you see this is a little young fern that comes up. It's actually a blood thinner and can be used for bronchitis and other such things. And so these plants are all waiting there too. And what you got to understand a little bit is on the land, When we keep talking about medicine plants and maybe how we use them, you have to understand that animals need these medicine plants too. And if they're not out there and you don't have proper burning, if you're just doing prescribed fire and even wildfire, they're not necessarily going to bring all these different plants back because they cook too hot. And so, this is cultural burning. We burn gently onto the land so that we can bring back what needs to come back. Next. Of course, that redbud that you saw the young folks from UC Davis working on, that's it after 1 year. Next. And of course, I moved back to the Crane Valley Meadow, and this is what the deer grass is, one of our older sites that we have there, and we're trying to restore other sites on that area. Next. Yeah, got a few people that we like to play tricks on and show them our cannabis plant. But this is a hemp plant to us. It's a hemp fiber, but it's called the Durango root. Yeah, looking at it too long. And of course, we have lots of different kinds of resources that are needed. So, gathering the grapevine so that we can make our nobies and for shelters and other products. Of course, this is one of my great friends and young ladies that's been with me for years, Stephanie Acres. Next. And the elderberry has about 4 different names. And this is the valley elderberry. It's actually was a mountain elderberry, but I planted it so that I can have my own hand clappers right here in my backyard. Next. The elderberry in the foothills is it's a medicine plant, and there was a lot of talk about with this COVID-19. That was the first thing that practitioners brought up, and of course doctors and others, put it down immediately. Oh, no, we can't have that kind of stuff. We can't have that kind of talk, But the flower and the bark of the elderberry takes care of most viruses that are out there. Might even have been able to take care of this one. I know one thing, that all of us who used it never got sick. Next. And this is the blue elderberry, and I've done a recent study. Some of you have seen the study, Spirituality of Culture. I'm looking at the verbiage and the wording, the language. Wi-yupy. This is in terms of Hubachi is an elder woman, and so we have that and Kunagib for grandpa, and so you look at all these different terminologies, and of course I asked my own elders. I said, why would we be looking at that when in fact people from Europe called it an elderberry as well? And of course, the simple answer was it grows forever, generational, never dies. Like, okay, see, very good answer. Next. And of course, we're looking at many different kinds of plants, including strawberries. And this is another one on Crane Valley where my wonderful little botanist friend of mine, I won't even say her name, we're always in fighting, and she's always telling me that these are woody strawberries and they're dormant. And of course, I have to remind her that God never made dormant plants. Man did. And of course, these strawberries have all had strawberries on them after we restored the land. Anyway, gotta love that story. Bye. Next. This is the soap root. This is what the soap root is supposed to look like. It's an actual soap, by the way. Take a bath in it, clean your hair, make a brush. Best brush you can ever find. Next. I think I'm running out of time, so you better pick it up.
Oh, you're fine.
Ah.
You are fine.
Oh, I'm fine. Well, I know I'm fine, but thank you anyway. this is the California buckeye, and there's a lot of different things uses for the buckeye, especially when you want to fish. Take the buckeye and throw it in the pool, and suck the nitrogen right out of the water, and your little fishes come up. And you say, "Oh, that's a good spot to fish." All right, you got to have tricks when you live on the land. Next. Sedge, white root, is something that we use for basketry. This one is back at Crane Valley Meadow, and after restoring the water and restoring the stream, and this thing really, the sedge really took over. My dad gathered here back in the 70s and 80s, and he used to tell me it's a different type of sedge. It's very fine, and you don't have to split it but once or twice, and he used it for his tops when he made baskets. My dad was one of the best basket makers in California. Next. Of course, we have sedge beds that I was speaking of when I started the talk, saying that we started in 1991. This is Fresno County in Lost Lake area along the San Joaquin River below Friant, and we have been restoring this bed for a couple of decades. And it's been really good. In fact, real quick story was that I take kids out here from elementary to middle school to high school, college, and one day we were all out there, and some federal wildlife folks were down on the creek, and they wandered up, and we asked them if they would give the kids a talk to tell them what they were doing, and what you can up here by the R on restoring, you can actually see the river. What they were doing was they were making beds for the salmon, and the salmon bed that they had chose was a little island which we knew existed there, and they were making a salmon bed for spawning in right next to it. And they walked up and they said, well, one of the reasons we chose this is because of the sandbar that is connected to the sedge bed and comes down into the creek. So whatever you guys are doing is already been helping us, and this is why we chose the spot. That was pretty exciting. We're working together. Next. Done. We're done. I hope you enjoyed it. Sorry about the impromptu, but hey, that one works too.
Yes, it worked. Thanks so much, Ron, for that very informative presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And now we have to move on to the Q&A session. We have several questions in our Q&A box here. The first question is, I think this one is for Jared. What training or qualifications are needed in order to participate in the firework day with the cooperative?
Sure. I can answer that in terms of I guess I would say that it's a moving target. You know, this is a brand new group, and we're all learning how to work together and collaborate. But with each workday in each location, essentially what's happening is the landowner is taking liability for the escape of the fire, you know, should an escape happen. And then, you know, we're asking the participants to sign a release, releasing liability, you know, in the event of personal injury or something of that sort. So essentially, in terms of, you know, one event, as we move forward and schedule more events, one event might require everyone to have a red card. On the other hand, a landowner who's conducting a workday on his or her land may simply want to talk to a potential participant and you know, go over the liability form and conduct training during the workday. So I'm about to answer another question here in the chat with some links to maps, and I'll also include my email address again. And then, you know, if anyone is curious, they're welcome to email me anytime, and I can start to put you in touch with landowners or other members of the cooperative as we move forward.
Okay, thank you. So someone asked if golden oak is the same as Kenyan live oak. I think, Ron, you kind of talked about this real issue. Can you respond to that?
It's in the same family, but they are not the same. And that's what the point I was trying to make to them is that you look at the cap of the acorn and you'll see that it's different. And then the leaf also has a difference between the golden oak and the Kenyan oak.
Okay, thank you. And then the next question is for you, Ron. Where did the plants used in the meadow restoration come from?
Well, I always say if you build it, they will come. So we don't bring them. Animals will bring seeds in on their paws and on their hooves, and birds bring seeds in and drop them. You know, that wind blows seeds in, and when you've opened up the ground and you provide sunlight and you provided water, then you're going to have the new growth. We ourselves don't bring plants or anything in.
So you're not reseeding or anything like that?
No.
How much of the redbud was cut before the burn? I think that's for Ron.
We always, when we burn, we trim around the edges of what we're going to burn, and so that it's that's actually for burn safety, so that what we're burning is burning in a little more of a compacted area. So when the redbud, the dry redbud that you saw, we just cut a few pieces around the edges that were leaning outward, and then chopped them up and made a little burn wood out of them, stick that back inside, and that's what we help to burn the bush up.
Okay, thank you. So there was a question, I don't know if Jared, you provided that information already about how to access indigenous land maps.
Hi, yes, I'm sorry, I initially entered the answer in, you know, after the wrong question. But I did enter, it's showing in Q&A answered for me right now, and below Rebecca's reply, I've said here are the links to a couple of the maps that I showed. And then if anybody has any questions related to those or other sources, I gave my email address again.
Okay.
And let me just add really quickly, and I see another question from a really good question from a Yurok gentleman that maybe Ron is going to address. But in terms of these maps, any of these resources, or I mentioned working with stories, I just want to, you know, strongly emphasize that the need is to collaborate with tribes on all of this. So if you want to use maps to get a better idea of where some of the tribes are located and who to contact, that would be a great use of a map. But you know, before you go out and try to locate trails or do any work or learn more about the history, you know, my recommendation is to contact tribes and landowners, and I can help you with that if you want to email me if you have more questions. But make sure that you're learning about these maps and these photos and stories and how to work with them appropriately from the people whose maps and stories and photos they are.
Okay, thanks for that answer. This one is from Joe Holstler. He's from the Yurok tribe, and his question is for Ron. I'll read it so you can kind of hear everything. Many of the participants are not tribal people, but do want to help put good fire on the ground. Do you have any tips for them to understand how they can work with tribes in their respective areas? And how have you been able to build relationships? And he's thanking you. You are such an inspiration. So can you respond to those questions, Ron? What some of your tips are for people to get fire on the ground and how you've managed to build relationships that you've built?
Hi, Joe, by the way. This is a very great question. It's a very kind of complex question. Getting fire on the ground is not a very easy thing to happen. And so let me come back to that. Once I am going to put fire on the ground, one of the things, and I bypassed it quickly in the presentation, was I invite people from all over the state, rather from the colleges, from tribes, from agencies. This year I even got brave and invited CAL FIRE. Oh my gosh, and the Forest Service, you know. But hey, you know, I told them they just had to behave when they come out there, and they're at my fire. You know, this is not their fire. And but I'm saying that to you so that you can be brave and not allow them to take over, because they have experience and they have good knowledge on what they're doing. It's just that they don't have our knowledge. And so that's the key, is making sure that when folks come in, and you have to understand that, you know, all the people that you invite, they all have knowledge on fire in some manner. They just don't exactly have what we're doing and how we're doing it and why we're doing it. That's a big key, why we're doing it, and how we expect our burn to come out in the end, so that when I burn, when I do restoration, I already know what the result is. I work with a number of collaboratives. I work with the forest, I work with parks, and I tell them, or I ask them, what is your goal? What is this supposed to look like when you get done with your plan here? They usually cannot answer me because they can only see what their objective is. They can't actually see the whole picture. because they're not used to seeing that. So whatever I'm going to do, if I just did a burn in February and we had 13 resource burns and 1 3-acre broadcast burn, I know exactly how it was going to turn out. I know all the different flowers that were going to come out, and I know that I'm getting rid of the invasive plants, and I know how long it's going to take those cultural resources to come back, and how much Sourberries and Redbuds, how they're going to produce after I burn it. And I know that medicine plants are going to come back out. These are the things that I know. It's not about wondering if that's going to happen. We already know that's how it's going to look. You know, I'm the artist. I'm drawing and painting the picture. I know how it's going to come out. I'm not wondering how it's going to come out when I get done throwing paint on my easel. You know, I'm not some abstract artist. I know exactly what I'm going to paint, and I know exactly how it's going to look when I get done. And so that's the important part when you're working with people and you're working with others is, you know, they can't see that. They can't see what you see. Now, real quickly, to come back to how to get fire on the land, that's a tough one because while I've had Forest Service put fire on the land over the last 15 years, I had to work with them. I had to bring them out, and me and my team were out there trying to direct them. But, you know, we burned, and so we had burning deer grass, and, you know, they used torches because they don't know anything else. So they walked out and stuck their torch in the middle of the deer grass and killed it. And so, you know, it didn't come back. That's not how you burn deer grass, you know. And a lot of the firefighter people that, you know, I've even brought in from other tribes, if they're firefighter trained, that's what they know. They don't understand that there's a different way to light a fire. Our February burn, we had torches available, and some used them out on the broadcast burn, but I didn't like them being burned on my resources because it doesn't burn properly. And in fact, Jess, my #1 burner, and my nephew, you know, he wouldn't use them. I got a match, and I got a lighter, and I'm good. And because there's a way to burn, and there's a way to work with the wind and to get your burn done properly. Taking a torch and walking around your pile is not proper. Now, to get fire on the land, in this particular case in Mariposa, they have a much different restriction in their air quality people, and the air quality people are pretty strong with CAL FIRE and county, and so they want fire in that particular area. So a lot of ranchers burn. You come to Madera and Fresno, and that is not the case because, you know, it's about the people, and the people don't want fire. I live out in Academy, and I have a burn permit, and we burn. But my neighbors all get on their little high horse and tell me how terrible it is that on a nice, beautiful day, and nice, clear day, and nice, sunny day, that their bleep, bleep, bleep neighbor is over there smoking up the neighborhood. Yeah, you know, that's the way it is. I tell them to go back where they come from, but we all got to live together, I guess. So it's much tougher to.
Okay. Thanks, Ron. I think this conversation is really important. That's why we have you come here. Oh,
into place, and I'm about ready to have it put into place 3 years later. But working with the park, a whole different story. I didn't have to have no red card. I go out there because I'm already one of the burn bosses, and I walk out there, and they'll say, "Well, we'll dress you all up if you want." I said, "No, I don't want." Well, I said, "I'm close enough to fire line right here. I can tell you what's going on and what we need to reburn and what needs to happen." And it's a whole different attitude of how they burn. And of course, I'm working with Sequoia Park, and they're some of the best burners around. But at the same time, everybody's a little bit different in how you're able to do that. So I know with the forest, including the Karuk and the Yurok, they've got the Trex program, and if that's what works, fine. I would never use it. If they have to burn with the Nature Conservancy, that's fine too. I would never use them. I don't even like burning with the Forest Service, and I definitely don't like burning with Cal Fire. But whoever wants to come out and join me, then fantastic. I don't know if I answered your question very good or not, Joe, but there it is.
okay. Thank you for the answer. I feel like this are the conversations that we all need to have to kind of get different perspectives and learn from each other. And I guess that's what we're trying to cultivate here with this presentation today. The next question is, what can California settlers do to advocate for and support indigenous land rights and management practices in our state? I think both of you can respond to that question.
I'll go ahead first. I'm sure Jared will too, but because he's looking at the liability issue. But one of the things that I'm going to be working on is to go to maybe even Cal Fire, but I don't expect much out of them because I've worked with them before. I'm talking about state level, but is the Air Control Board. I have a permit, and I was told that I could do cultural burning in 2010. And so with the very first Southern Sierra Fire Prescribed Fire Council that we had in Fresno or Clovis, and the head man from the Air Board said, "We have cultural burning. You're allowed to do cultural burning." I said, "Really?" "Yeah, we even have a permit." "Really?" Well, when I got to Mariposa County, they didn't have a permit, but what they had was just a regular burn permit, and for the ranchers and for whomever. And so I had to write in what I was doing and how I was doing it. And of course, the county has put that on file, and every time I walk in there, I don't fill out a new permit. They go over there and change the date on it and hand it back to me. I'm not in there 5 minutes, and I'm ready, off and running. So that part is fantastic. But I've talked to different folks, and every different tribal area, the air control people and Cal Fire all have a different attitude on how things should go, and when should you burn, and what's the humidity today, and all this and that. Well, in Mariposa, if I'm burning, I'm going to burn unless it's an extreme non-burn day. And if it's an extreme non-burn day, I'm not burning either. So I don't have a problem with that. But if it's a non-burn day, I'm still burning. If I have 100 people out there, if I have 20 people out there, I've bought food and I've bought porta potties, and have all my equipment out there, we're burning. And they don't have a problem with that. But if but there is, there gets to be some concerned, and CAL FIRE and different people that are in these agencies sometimes cannot see past what policies they have. So that needs to change, and we need to create some, even if it's a generic type of a policy that says tribes know what they're doing when they're cultural burning, and we need to burn with them. We have made that change in Fresno County to the extent that when you burn, when the forestry and the park burns, they don't have to put their burns out. And that includes cultural burning. So we've made that change in those areas, but you got to go to every one of them. So we need to go to the state level, start there, and come back down.
Okay. Thank you. So it's 11:30, and this is the time we're supposed to end, but we've one more question to answer. So if Jared and Ron are okay, we can continue with this conversation, so we can just go through all the questions here. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending our session today, and for all those that attended all our other sessions. We really appreciate you joining us, and if you have time, stick around and we'll be able to go through these other questions, as long as Ron and Jared are okay with answering the last couple of questions.
I'm okay.
Okay, Jared, do you have any comments for this question that Ron just responded to?
Sure, yes. In addition to Ron's excellent answer, with a lot of the detail that he provided, I guess generally what I would recommend is, if you're interested in advocating and advocating for and supporting tribes, every once in a while there are some things that come up on the statewide level, certainly the federal level, but in Sacramento right now, I know there's a legislative proposal to set aside maybe $10 or $20 million per year out of the $200 million that the governor has allocated to his new fire management program, to take some of that money, a portion, and set it aside to go directly to tribes for their fire management activities. So, there are some pieces of legislation and other issues that come up now and then that you could keep track of. And then I guess even more generally, what I would recommend is, in order to support or advocate for indigenous land rights and land management practices, what would be great is to provide general support for tribes. So, again, contact the tribes in your region and see what their needs are. It could be something as simple as maybe volunteering for an after-school homework session. So, if you're supporting tribes socially and economically, you're supporting their ability to focus on what they want to do in terms of land management practices also. And what you're doing when you contact tribes directly and find out how you can offer to collaborate or enter into some sort of reciprocal, mutually beneficial agreement to accomplish something, you're building relationships, and that's the best thing you can do.
Okay, thank you. And then the last question is, Native Americans' burnt fires were economic, aimed at increasing food and fiber supplies. The fire suppression of the so-called scientific forestry was also economic, aimed at curtailing the waste of timber. How do we view prescribed fire today?
You want to take that one, Ron, first? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I just didn't quite fully understand the question. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I guess, yeah, I'm not sure I understand either, but it's you know, completely either. It's a good question, because what it brings to mind for me is, you know, not only how we view prescribed fire, but how we define that term, prescribed fire. So when you say Native Americans burned, and of course I've got to point out that they're still burning today. For, you know, but if the purposes of native fires are economic, that's true. That's partly true, but there are other purposes. There are cultural purposes. It's not only for food and fiber, and you know, maybe that's where I'll let Ron elaborate if he wants to. But there, I mean, there can be. That's why I like to use the term cultural fire, because it's an alternative to prescribed fire, which is really a term that comes from the agencies and the need to have a written prescription that doesn't necessarily apply to the way that you know, an artist like Ron Goode works in terms of using fire to create things. Let's put it that way. I mean, it's a, you know, it would be, I think it's too difficult to say, how do we view prescribed fire today? Because that word "we" is a little too all-inclusive to, you know, to define how we all view fire and how to use fire on the land today is a pretty complex question.
Yes, so this is Ron. So prescribed fire is normally about fuel reduction and about trying to ensure that if a wildfire comes through, that it can be controlled. And so if you put prescribed fire out there, and then you're able to create buffer zones. And so when a wildfire comes along, then it's going to hit these buffer zones, and you have a chance then to control it. When we're talking about cultural burning, there is an economic value to cultural burning. And I'll do that real quickly in terms of especially the Jack Kirk estate. It's under the Williamson Act. And so we don't have four-legged animals as far as cows and horses and anything else that can be considered agricultural crop. So therefore, we are under the conservation aspect of the Williamson Act. And that then comes back to the harvesting by the Native Americans. And then we have to put a dollar value on the sticks that the Native American gathers, or the amount of berries that the Native American gathers. And it doesn't even have to be Native American, anybody that comes there to gather. I put a dollar value on a flat of berries, $100, and you have 10 flats of berries, and you got $1,000. I have to come up with $3,000 to show that we have the right to continue our Williamson Act. And so, same with the sticks. If they come and gather 800 sticks, they're able to net 2 baskets worth $1,500 each. That's $3,000. So there is a value per se, but the overall concept, as I pointed out to you, the medicine plants that come back, the fact that there's a new growth that comes back immediately from the burn. And I want that new growth. I want that new growth because not only is that going to hold water, it's new life, and it's a refreshed vegetation, revitalized vegetation so that when a fire does come, yeah, a wildfire would burn it, but it wouldn't burn it hot like it was when it was dead and dying. So at that point in time, where if you've been burning 40, 50 acres of land and a wildfire comes through, it becomes a buffer or a place where you can control that wildfire. And so to that degree, that, is similar to what a purpose of a prescribed fire is. But ultimately, what prescribed fires by agencies, they have a different goal in mind, and it is economic, because they want, the ponderosa pine or the Jeffrey pine to come back, or the sugar pine. They don't want the cedar because the cedar don't make money. They don't want the fir because the fir don't make money. So they're looking at a certain type of return that's going to be the best bang for their buck, and that's really ultimately what they're burning for. So there is a big, huge difference in how we look at things.
Okay. Thank you. I really like what you both discussed. I think it's more about what are the goals of whether you want to call it cultural burn or fire suppression, maybe not, but the prescribed fire that we may be trying to figure out how to put back on the ground, like somebody mentioned, the good fire. I think it's upon us to really decide what kind of fire and what are the goals we want to at least encourage. And I think it'll be good for us to kind of look at all the different goals that we can achieve. One of the conversations that we had at our Shaver Lake prescribed fire workshop that we had last year, one of the really encouraging discussions we had was when John, I can't remember his last name now, but he said with prescribed fire, you can achieve so many different goals. You can go in and say you are going in for fuel reduction, but you can also say you are aiming to increase wildlife habitat. You might be trying to improve or to control weeds or to at least facilitate those fiber and food supplies on the landscapes. I think it's all upon us as to how we want to apply this fire onto the ground to achieve as many goals as we can to increase or improve natural resources sustainability. That's how I think about it. I don't know if any of the panelists have any comments on this one.
Yeah, Fazai.
Yes.
So real quickly, let's look at oaks for a minute, and any prescribed fire that's out there and that's going to be burning through oaks. But let's look at an oak grove. If you have 60 oaks, let's call them black oaks for now. They could be white oaks, they could be golden oaks. So you have 60 black oaks in a 100-acre, all right? But none of them are producing acorn.
Mm-hmm.
If they're not producing acorn, they're not producing new trees. If they're not producing acorn, you're not feeding the squirrels. If you're not feeding the squirrels, you're not feeding the fisher. If you're not producing young shoots, you're not feeding the fawns. And if your trees are unhealthy, even the wild turkeys can't live there. So what is happening to your oak grove if you aren't putting proper fire underneath it? And so you can put a broadcast burn under it. We've done this. I've done this with the forest. And then come back and put, it's all cultural burning, even if it's a broadcast, because you're removing the duff. And the duff is sometimes as deep as 18 inches or more in certain spots. And there are a lot of parasites that like to live in there. So it becomes very important to eliminate that. And then you can come back and put small fire underneath the oaks and smoke it, so that you're trying to increase the acorn production. And within 2 to 3 years, you will see a vast number of those 60 oaks producing acorn. And if they're producing acorn, and acorn is all over the ground. So this happened in Sequoia, where we had 2 cultural burns. One had 91 trees of white oak, or blue oak, excuse me, and 115 blue oak. And the acorn production, when we first monitored, was 36% of the trees produced acorn. And then after we burned the first year, it went up to 50 to 55%. And after the second year, they were all not only still producing at that level, but some trees were mass producing. So what that means is that the amount of acorn on the ground, when you walked on top of it, you couldn't touch the ground because you were walking just on acorn. Now, our species count was very low, and you could hardly see any animals around. But some animals had to be living off whatever acorn was there. Immediately after we started burning, and all the acorn was being eaten before December, because we were monitoring November and October and come back again and take another look. And so the more acorn we produced, the more it got ate. So more animals were coming. And then pretty soon we started seeing the flocks of turkeys and some coyotes and even bear wandering around. So everybody was coming, because it's like you have a free buffet. Everybody's going to show up for free buffet, you know? But if you don't have that buffet, if you're not producing that acorn, we have thousands, if not millions, of trees out on our forests that are not producing. That's the sad part. So if people tell me, agencies tell me, and I ask them this all the time, can you give me a list of your species that you're supposed to be in charge of out here? They can't do it. They cannot give me a list and say, here's all the animals that we know are out here, all the different insects and all the different reptiles and everything that's out here. No, nobody has that, but they have people paid that could do that. And so they don't know who they're feeding. They don't know who they're taking care of. And that's the bigger part of looking at why we need to be burning and what is the sole purpose back behind it. If it's not for the people, if it's not for humans, let's look at the longevity of our land. Because if we're not producing food for the people that need to be here on the land, and so that they have a sustainability, eventually they're all going to go. They're going to be a bigger threatened list of animals that are not here, that are important to the land. Eventually, we're not going to be here. So that's our plight. We need to change our thinking. Think about what we're doing and why we're doing it. Thank you.
That's a great response. Thank you for that. It just puts everything in perspective. Thank you, Ron and Jared, for such an amazing and informative presentation today. We really appreciate you coming on and talking to us. And I want to thank the attendees who are still on here for staying on and listening in. I just want to thank you all for being here and attending this series. If you're still here, please make sure to fill out the exit survey for us. We really want to hear from you what worked with this format and also how can we improve this kind of webinars, educational webinars going forward. Would really appreciate your input on that. And I think that's all. We are done for today and we are done with this series. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.